Welcome to Entre Nosotras, part two of our conversation with mayoral candidate Veronica Carbajal. Thank you for being with us here, Ms. Carbajal.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Peregrino. It's an honor.
And so last time we had the opportunity to get to know Ms. Carbajal, who, as the viewers will know, is the only Latina running for mayor this November. She talked about her background as an attorney for legal aid. And so for the people that maybe didn't have the opportunity to watch that first show, you mentioned you have been you went to Brown University. Did you mention what high school?
Burgess
High School. And then from there, you went to law school. Could you tell us where you went to law school again, just to remind the viewers?
Yes, UT Austin.
UT Austin. And you mentioned you've been with Legal Aid for 16 years. In your work with Legal Aid, what are you most proud of?
I mean, I'm very lucky. Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid has given me the freedom to take on challenging cases. And I know that for private attorneys, they have to really think about the bottom line. We're lucky that we have, funding that in some ways we're able to take cases that don't make money, right? That are expensive to take on, but don't generate attorney's fees. And so one of those included fighting the power plant in Montana Vista in about 2012, 2013. And we created we weren't able to keep the power plant from being built because we're in Texas and it's very challenging to do that. But we did get some important concessions to the community, including the fact that the plant cannot expand. They can only get solar powered panels out there if they want to increase the amount of energy that they produce there. But in terms of and I love that case. I love so many of my cases. I think the ones that I'm most proud of are my homeowner cases. I've taken on at this point hundreds of cases involving people who have been defrauded in the purchase of real estate. So these are people in the colonias as well as inside the city limits, people who put in their hard-earned money and skills into buying a house, only to find out that the title was not clean or that they had to deal with other liens or encumbrances. And I think I'm really proud of that because we have taken on cases that no one wanted to touch. We have been able to shut down bad actors. We have been able to inform the judiciary. A lot of judges didn't know what they were looking at because these schemes just look so weird and improbable. And we've been able to save homes. I have yet to lose a house. My clients will either keep their house or walk away with damages. And so I think I'm really proud of that. And I have just an incredible amount of respect for homeowners because they show up, they fight, they're dedicated. And so I've been very lucky to work with homeowners.
And so you mentioned the power plant out in Montana Vista. And I know you have a background in environmental justice. So could you talk about if elected mayor, what would your policies be dealing with environmental issues?
Absolutely. There's so much to be done. El Paso has been non-attainment for ozone pollution for years. Particulate matter is also an issue. We need to figure out how to become attainment, right, to clear our air, because that impacts whether someone is going to move here or not. If you have asthma, you know to look for clean air in your next city. You're not going to move here if you have asthma and you look at the ozone levels consistently because it is an irritant for your lungs. I think there's so many things that we must be doing. One of them is looking at what we think of as environmental justice communities that are right next to pollution, whether it's from the bridges, from recycling facilities, from bus hubs, like the Chamizal has all of those things and more, but also the refinery, also the landfill, and how do we deal with those pollution sources and the things that contribute to those pollution sources. How do we alleviate traffic so that we have less reliance on the refinery? How do we monitor those communities to make sure that we know what people are going through when it comes to both monitoring the pollution, but monitoring the health effects? That's why it's really important to have a robust and consistent public health department that understands those things, that has as a core value environmental protection, so that we understand if there are hot spots of, you know, whether, I know that with particulate matter, for instance, when UTEP was doing studies, they realized that there was a high incidence of heart attacks on days when we have high levels of particulate matter pollution. Why? Because particulate matter affects your body's ability to process oxygen. So you're not getting enough oxygen through your bloodstream. And so if you have a heart condition, PM is actually going to cause heart attacks. And so making those correlations is really important for our communities. When I first started at Legal Aid, I did public benefit cases, and those involve people who are trying to get on disability benefits. And they were heart-wrenching. You know, I had clients who died on me because they were still waiting on their benefits and their health care to kick in. I mean, that's really what our clients are looking for most of the time, is just the Medicaid or the Medicare. And if they're not able to get that, they often are not able to survive or deal with things that are treatable, like diabetes, like heart conditions. And so we need to bolster our wellness clinics as well, and our health clinics in particular, but also deal with the root causes. You know, we live in a city and in a community where we tend to blame the victim. Even just recently, our city manager said that we're going to get through COVID by staying fit, eating healthy, and having a fit mind, a strong mindset. And that's insulting, because that's not true. Like, yes, those things are important, but when we don't deal with the underlying cause of why someone isn't eating healthy, are they close to a grocery store that has healthy food? Do they have the money to buy groceries that are healthy? Because a bag of chips is sometimes cheaper than a bag of tomatoes. And so you need to really think about people's access to things. And also, do they have access to clean air on a regular basis? So things like that, I think that we need to think about. They're complex issues, but I think that at the end of the day, we do have some simple solutions for all of those things that conflate to make people's lives better.
And I think right now, because of COVID, we're all, you know, thinking about the quality of life, and I know we touched upon some of those issues in our previous show, and so thinking about you know, access to clean air, clean water, healthy food. What do you think the city could be doing, or if elected mayor, what would you do to help improve those conditions?
There are so many small and big things that we can do. On a city scale, we need to move to solar, right? So the city had a chance to really look at whether it could buy El Paso Electric during this buyout by JP Morgan, and the Sunrise Movement was very active in educating all of us about why this could be a possibility. And the city said no. They said, we're not going to even explore municipalizing. So that was a huge loss of opportunity. But we know once we reopen that the city is a consumer of electricity. We have community centers, we have street lighting, etc. We need to convert as many of our buildings as we can to solar energy. We need to utilize our roofs to do a lot of that. And we need to think about the power of weatherizing, not only city buildings, but also people's homes. And it's expensive to do that, but it is so important. We know that when we have the hottest days, like this summer, where we've had over 100 degrees, across the country, not just in El Paso, we see higher mortality rates for people with disabilities and people who are elderly. People will shut down their AC because they can't afford it, or if it gets shut off because they can't pay their bills, and that leads to death for a lot of people. Some people need electricity to keep their equipment turned on for medical necessities, their insulin if it has to be refrigerated if they're diabetic, and then sometimes people, people who are older and live by themselves sometimes tend to be very, very careful about their money, and so they will forego having the air conditioner turned on to save money, and then they pass away. So weatherizing is, I think, very important, along with just in general having resources for home repairs. Bigger things like public transit, improving public transit, and really encouraging and incentivizing people's use. I would love for public transit to be free, and to be able to encourage certain employees and employers to utilize it. There are people who don't use their car except to go to work and to come back home. They're at work all day. And so what if we crafted a lot of these different transit programs that tailor to that? And, and then it goes to things like creating green jobs in El Paso, beyond just the creation of solar panels, but really looking at what else could we be doing to create jobs that in the construction industry, in the all kinds of things, right? But in terms of manufacturing, that we could have green manufacturing, in terms of recycling facilities here, there's a lot that we can be doing and should be doing to make sure that we're polluting less.
And I think you bring up a lot of good points there in terms of what other cities are doing. So it's not reinventing the wheel, but kind of taking into considerations the things that are doing. And so switching topics a little bit, I know last time we were talking about the anniversary coming up of the August 3rd shooting that people know about locally, the Walmart shooting, which was the worst attack on Latinos, and 24 people were murdered. Or perhaps it's 23. Maybe I'm getting my numbers. Yeah, 23. I was, I guess miscounting, right? Because the coach recently passed away. And I know that recently City Council, or in a budget meeting, one of the city officials said that the community wasn't interested in having any type of memorial, that we were okay with the lights. Do you feel differently?
We did work with a lot of the victims. I will never speak for them. I think that the victims, the survivors, and there's thousands of them, right? It's not just the people that were killed, it's the people that were with them when they died, the people that were injured, the thousands of witnesses that are still dealing with the mental health scars from that event. And so I don't know if they're the ones that were surveyed and whether their feedback was that they didn't want a memorial. I think, I would leave it to them to decide. And I hope that the city actually did speak to them and make that decision, and that it was based on that. Because I think what the city may have said was something that along the lines of that they thought it'd be too painful to remember that. And I can't tell you if that's true or not. I do know that many of us, thousands of us, went to the memorial, the makeshift memorial that was at Ponder, and that was part of the healing. It was a time for people to reflect and to cry and to mourn and to hope for a better world. And so I don't know. Again, I don't know what precautions were taken to ensure that people's voices were heard, but I think the community should have a memorial.
Interesting that you got to know the victims and some of the survivors of that shooting. But yes, we still don't know exactly who they surveyed or what focus groups were there. But that's an interesting topic. And so, thinking about in the last show you mentioned George Floyd, and we even had some local demonstrations here. What would you do differently than this current administration when it comes to to the city police department?
So our campaign put forth, and we're the only campaign, as far as I know, that has done this so far. We put forth a statement about transforming the police department. And let me tell you that we put a lot of thought and study into that, knowing that we would make some people on both sides of the spectrum upset, because we're not calling for defunding or abolishing the police, but we are calling for community policing and going beyond the reforms that have not worked. So we're talking about transforming the police department. And so there are folks who are upset because we haven't gone far enough. And then there are other folks who quickly called me the anti-cop candidate. And keep saying there's only a few bad apples. That's all we need to do is to pluck them out and everything will be fine. And I think we're beyond that. Maybe 4 years ago, we could still say reform, but reform has not worked. Reform has been tried in places like El Paso, and we're still seeing disproportionate numbers of racial profiling, as well as abuse at the hands of the police. El Paso does not have the demographics that others do, because we're a majority minority community, we're majority Latinx. That does not mean we're immune to these issues. And because of George Floyd's death, it forced a conversation that we had postponed having, including in El Paso. But during the many roundtables that I watched, as well as the one that we hosted, Black El Pasoans told us we are treated very differently by our police, and it has to stop. We've an issue that dovetails to this is the issue of mental health, because we know that because not, it's been dealt with in litigation that is pending before one of our federal courts in El Paso. We know that Chief Allen has failed to adequately train, supervise, and reprimand officers who have been accused of police brutality, in particular with people who have mental health issues. And that is unacceptable. I think the reason that we called for transformation is because there is a culture of us versus them at our police department. It's palpable. If for instance, I've been to many protests related to Duranguito, related to the Mexican American Cultural Center, related to most recently the Black Lives Movement, and we are treated with a lot of hostility. We are treated as criminals, as if we're committing a crime right then and there. And that type of force is fodder for brutality, and we don't need it. It doesn't serve us, it does not make us any safer. And so in calling for this transformation, we looked at different cases, including the Eric Salas Sanchez case, which is probably the one most recently that has been studied through the course of the litigation. And we've learned a lot. And a lot of the problems stem from Chief Allen's refusal to treat officers as officers, right? They are treated as, they're shielded from any kind of repercussion. And that is dangerous. When you have a police officer, there are three things that you expect from them. You expect them to stop a crime. You expect them to apprehend the suspect, and you expect them to collect evidence. But when an officer is accused of having committed a crime, those three things don't happen. No one intervenes, no one apprehends, and no one investigates. That is very dangerous, and more so offensive because we're paying for that. And so because the police department consumes more than 60% of our resources, we need to think about the best use of that money. Because when we're saying yes to the police, we're saying no to these other things, including addressing mental health in a way that is humane and effective. That is a huge issue in our community, huge, right? And when we think about things like the separation of children, with immigration, when we think about the mass shooting, even the pandemic, we've been through a lot of collective trauma. And so we have a lot of people in our community, including soldiers from Fort Bliss that have, PTSD and things like that, where we do have a need to have consistent, high quality mental health resources. And dealing with, and so we need to think about how we fund that instead of funding a police force to deal with those issues, because they're not equipped to deal with them.
And so I know that I've briefly looked at your plan. I think in your plan you had a civilian review board. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So there is an existing shooting review board, and the review board is supposed to look at what happened every time there's an incident of a shooting by a police officer. The review board is supposed to be able to look at that. In the Eric Salas case, what happened was that the review board found that the officer had not acted outside of his outside of the line, right? So with that case, Eric was having an episode. He wasn't hurting anyone or himself. He walked into a neighbor's house. She found him sitting on the couch. She asked him to leave, and he went across the street to his own house. Someone called the police and said he's having a mental breakdown. The police showed up, and they, I believe he yelled at them. He did not threaten them. He did not have any arms with him. When he walked away, they tased him and then shot him twice in the back and once in the buttocks, and he died from those wounds. There was no de-escalation. There was no talking to him. After that, the case went to the shooting review board. The review board was not given the chance to speak to any other witnesses. So his sister and his mom who were there were not spoken to, only the police officers. The police officers were not separated after the incident, so they were able to, basically match up their story and their version of the facts before they spoke to the review board. The review board was not given access to the blood splatter, which would have shown that he was shot in the back. And they were not told that the police had initially told the Texas Rangers that he was shot in the chest. And so the review board didn't have all of the information, right? People think of the review boards as a court of law, and they're not. The chief of police still gets to dictate what information goes before that. When you are in court, you have discovery, you have depositions, you have a better understanding of what happened from everyone's perspective. These review boards don't do that. So when I talk about a citizens review board, first of all, we need to have people that are on the review board that are appointed by elected officials and that have, a good reason to be sitting on this board, don't have a bias, and we need subpoena power so that we can then decide what information we want the chief or anyone else to provide to us and not the other way around. So it gives us a better understanding, but it's not a replacement for a court of law, and that's why it's important that the DA is also involved with these shootings. And that was not the case in the Eric Salas case. Chief Allen kept the DA outside of the investigation.
And I actually wasn't familiar with this case until you brought it up. So there was no charges filed against the officer?
There were.
Okay.
So in terms of the civil review board is different from the criminal courts, and so the shooting review board said I'm not sure what the term is right now, but they absolved him of responsibility of saying that he had committed wrongdoing, but he was indicted. I believe he was not found guilty, or he was acquitted, but he was indicted.
Okay.
And so what's going on right now is a civil case by his family for damages.
Okay, and I think you bring up a good point that because of that we live in Texas, and so we don't have a lot of access to mental health, that yes, that maybe people sometimes call the police, and if they don't have the proper training, tragedies like this could happen. And so you would be interested in having more mental health training for officers?
There's already, it's called the CIT, the Crisis Intervention Team, and it just has not gone far enough, and it hasn't been funded enough. But with that CIT, you have an officer and either a mental health professional or someone trained, certified in that, so that when you get a call and there's some incidents of mental health, they are sent to the scene and they try to de-escalate the situation and not apply physical force. From what I've heard from people in the campaign is that you have to be very specific about what is happening and the fact that it is a mental health episode. So if you, as someone who is suffering from a psychotic episode, call and say, I need the police, and because I'm seeing these things, or you may not be able to communicate to the other side that you're having a mental health breakdown, but that's what's going on, right? So how do they intimate that from the conversation? And so what I've been told is if you call and you don't say, I need CIT, they don't send CIT. And so we need to improve that, right? So that from the very beginning, the 911 operator understands what's happening and is able to send the right people over, and you don't show up and the police are using excessive force on someone because they don't understand that they have mental health issues.
Yeah, and you make a good point there, because if people don't know that this service exists, or that this specially trained team can go out, then they're not going to know to ask for it. Mm-hmm. And so I know we touched a lot upon topics that we brought up in the first part of the show, but there were some questions that I didn't get to, and so I guess what I wanted to ask you is, speaking of, so perhaps thinking about some of the people that are supporting your campaign, what endorsements have you received, and which ones are you most proud of?
Yes, so I'll go in order. Our first endorsement was State Senator Jose Rodriguez, who's been a mentor and a friend, and I consider him a comrade in some of the things that we have fought, because he has stood alongside our clients and has tried to change the law in many instances, in many of our cases. Former County Judge Alicia Chacon, who's a hero. If you don't know who she is, you must learn who she is, because she has been a trailblazer. In 1968, she was the first Chicana to, let me get the name right, to serve on a state executive committee for the Texas Democratic Party. And then in 1983, she was the first Chicana city representative for the city of El Paso. So our city council was, she represented us on city council in 1983, and has just been a hero and a advocate for people who are poor and people of color. So she's amazing. In April, we had a lot of endorsements from environmentalists, including the Sunrise Movement, which is incredible. It's a lot of young people working to make some effective changes. Bill Guerra Eddington, who fought against the toxic waste dump in Sierra Blanca. Judy Ackerman, who has fought, she fought for Lost Dog and Cast in Rain, and is always just involved in a lot of different actions to protect the environment. Marilyn Guida, who is also an anthropologist and an environmentalist. Semeli de Aslan, who's involved with Familias Unidas del Chamizal and countless other organizations, and is an environmentalist as well as a community organizer. And then Danny and Margaret Arellano. Danny was an ex-Asarco worker, And we've worked many, many years together trying to get justice for the workers who were dealing with very serious health issues. Um, and most recently, Commissioner David Stout has endorsed me, and he's very progressive. He stands with the people. He most recently pushed for a second revote to ensure that Segundo Barrio was protected as a historic, well, not historic district, but national register designation, since the city refuses to do that, but the county took it on, and he fought to make sure that all of Segundo Barrio is considered to be a part of Segundo Barrio and not downtown. So we've had some great endorsements. You know, the community has just been fantastic. Every day we seem to gain more support from people that just need a voice, and people who aren't necessarily involved in politics, but who are seeing in our campaign issues that speak to them.
And so in the last show, you mentioned that you never saw yourself running for public office. What made you change your mind?
I think, you know, so my great grandfather was a presidente municipal, you know, a mayor of Guadalupe Distrito Bravo. And when I was little, my grandparents used to, they read the paper every day, and they would always call politicians una bola de rateros, you know, a bunch of thieves. And so when I had some quiet time with my great grandfather, I said, "Why did you become a thief? Like, why did you become a politician?" And he said, "You know, me cansé de ver cómo explotaban a mi gente. I got tired of seeing them exploit my people." And that just stuck with me and really informed the way that I saw the world that I was growing up in. Because I grew up in Juarez, I got to see poverty firsthand. And even though my mom was a low-wage worker in El Paso, I knew that we were very privileged. We were US citizens. I had access to an education. And these children that I saw every day working on the bridge were not going to have a pathway to a better life. And so after I spoke to my great grandfather, I realized that their conditions were not because of God, right? It was people were making choices that kept these children and their families in dire poverty with no way out. I never thought I would turn my social justice work into politics. But then, like I said, I had to deal with the city. And I've been involved with Duranguito since 2016. It has shown me time and again that we are being exploited, that we are not in control. And when I say we, I mean la gente, el pueblo, our people. Oligarchs still run the city, and they do so to serve themselves and not to serve us. And so I am very much against all of the tax incentives that are being deposited into private hands downtown. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars, right? We cannot hire a public health director, yet we're giving millions of dollars to subsidize the baseball park, especially right now because no one is going to the baseball park. Millions of dollars for all of these private buildings that are beautiful, and I love history, but I cannot walk into those buildings the way that I walk into a public library. They're not free. I have to go and consume, but I paid for that building, right, with my taxes, yet I don't have access to it. So that's the kind of exploitation that I'm talking about. It's very different from what my great-grandfather saw in the 1940s, but it's still exploitation. It's still taking advantage of people's hard-earned money and not giving them enough in return. And so that's a long story a long answer to your question about why I decided to run.
And so I think we're coming to a close. I want to thank Veronica Carbajal, candidate for El Paso City Mayor, the only Latina running, and the only person that's grassroots, running a grassroots campaign that's bicultural, bilingual, and we're thankful that you took time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. And I guess I'll leave, you know, if you have anything else to say or any closing thoughts, you know,
Well, thank you, Dr. Peregrino. This is great. Your questions were spot on. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I just want to encourage everyone to ask questions of the candidates, not just for mayor, but all of the candidates that are running in different elections. This will be the first time that we elect a mayor in November. We used to have all of our city elections in May, which gave people very little time to do campaigns, and also resulted in very low turnout because people don't like to vote in May and also do a runoff in June. And so now we're going to see a lot more people coming to the polls, and it's very exciting for my campaign to be a part of that. And so we just encourage everyone to learn more about us and question the candidates, because the candidates are not going to address an issue unless you tell them to. And some of the things that I've talked about, including transforming the police department, are controversial. And that's okay. I mean, I'm not in this to not speak up. I am in this race to speak to issues that are important to me, whether or not they're controversial. They're important to the community and they need to be spoken about.
And so we'll go ahead and put your website information in case people want to learn more about the campaign and look at your platform issues. Thank you for being with us, and be well. And just to put a plug for our show, we also did a show on who rules El Paso, and so some of the issues that you brought up, we discussed with some of the authors of that book. Thank you for being with us. And we look forward to see what happens in the future. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.